The expensive coffee shop was packed that Tuesday afternoon. Business people typed away on laptops. Friends chatted over lattes. Everyone seemed to have their life together. Everyone except David. He sat in the corner booth, his $1,000 suit looking like he'd slept in it. Dark circles hung under his eyes. His hands shook slightly as he tried to rock the fancy stroller back and forth. Inside that stroller, his 6-month-old daughter Lily was crying. Not just crying, screaming. The kind of cry that makes everyone in a room turn their heads. David could feel every single pair of eyes on him. A woman in a business suit looked over her laptop screen and frowned. 2 college students whispered to each other, glancing his way. An older gentleman shook his head and went back to his newspaper. David wanted to disappear. He wanted to sink into the floor and never come back up. "Please, Lily," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, sweetheart. What do you need?" But Lily just cried harder. Her little face was red and scrunched up. Tears streamed down her chubby cheeks. David picked her up from the stroller, supporting her head the way he'd been taught. He bounced her gently. He tried holding her against his chest. He attempted the rocking motion his wife used to do. Nothing worked. 3 months ago, David had everything figured out. Well, not everything, but enough. He ran a successful tech company that he'd built from nothing. At 34, he was worth millions. He had a beautiful wife named Rachel, who handled everything at home while he handled the business. They had a plan. They were a team. Then Rachel collapsed in their kitchen one morning. Just fell down while making breakfast. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. The doctors said it was her heart, some condition she never knew she had. She was only 32. Now David was alone with a 3-month-old baby who suddenly had no mother. Everyone told him he was lucky. "At least you have money," they said. "At least you can afford help." He hired a nanny. Actually, he hired 3 nannies. The first one quit after a week. The second one lasted 2 weeks. The third one called in sick this morning and never answered his calls after that. So here he was trying to do this alone. And failing badly. Lily had been crying since noon. It was now almost 3 in the afternoon. David had tried everything he could think of. He'd fed her, changed her diaper twice, checked her temperature, made sure nothing was poking her or pinching her skin. He'd driven her around the neighborhood in his BMW because someone told him car rides helped babies sleep. That worked for maybe 15 minutes before she started up again. In desperation, he'd come to this coffee shop. He didn't even know why. Maybe he hoped being around other people would help. Maybe he just couldn't stand being in that big empty house anymore. The house that still smelled like Rachel's perfume. Where her coffee mug still sat by the sink because he couldn't bring himself to put it away. "Sir?" A young barista approached carefully. "Is everything okay? Can we get you anything?" David looked up at her. She couldn't have been more than 19. She had kind eyes, but he could see she wanted him to leave. Wanted him to take his screaming baby somewhere else. "I'm sorry," David said. "I'm so sorry. We'll go." But when he tried to stand up, his legs felt weak. He sat back down hard. The exhaustion hit him all at once. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours straight in 3 months. He'd been running on coffee and adrenaline and the desperate hope that somehow he'd figure this out. He looked down at Lily. Her little mouth was open wide as she screamed. Her tiny fists were clenched tight. And David felt something break inside him. Not dramatically. Not like in the movies. Just a quiet crack like ice on a frozen lake. "I don't know what to do," he whispered to his daughter. "Baby girl, I don't know what to do." "Your mom would know. Your mom always knew." The tears came before he could stop them. Right there in the crowded coffee shop, this millionaire businessman started crying. Holding his screaming baby, wearing his expensive suit, sitting in a corner booth, he cried. He didn't make noise. Didn't sob. Just let the tears run down his face while he held his daughter. He thought about Rachel. How she used to calm Lily down in seconds. She had this way of humming. Not even a real song, just a gentle sound. And Lily would stop crying and look up at her with those big blue eyes. David tried humming once. It sounded terrible and made Lily cry harder. He thought about his company. His assistant had called him 4 times today. There was some big meeting he was supposed to be in. Some deal worth millions that needed his signature. He'd ignored all the calls. What did any of that matter when he couldn't even comfort his own child? He thought about his parents. They lived across the country and kept offering to come help. But David's father had always been the type to solve problems with money, not presents. "Hire better help," he'd said on the phone last week. "You can afford the best. Act like it." But David didn't need the best nanny. He needed to know what he was doing wrong, why his own daughter seemed to cry more when he held her, why nothing he did was ever enough. The other customers had mostly stopped staring now. They'd gone back to their own lives, their own problems that probably felt big to them, but at least they could handle. David envied them. He'd trade his millions right now to know what they knew, how to live a normal day without feeling like he was drowning. Lily's cries had changed. They weren't as loud now, but somehow they sounded sadder, more hopeless. Like even she knew her dad was lost. David held her closer. He pressed his cheek against her soft hair. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry, baby girl. I'm trying. I promise I'm trying." But trying wasn't enough. He could try all day and all night. He could hire all the help in the world. He could read every parenting book ever written, and he'd still be this, a broken man in a coffee shop holding a crying baby with absolutely no idea what to do next. The barista came back with a glass of water. She set it down quietly and walked away without saying anything. David was grateful for that. He couldn't handle any more kind words or sympathetic looks or people telling him it would get easier. He took a sip of water. His hand was shaking so badly that some of it spilled on Lily's blanket. She kicked her little legs and cried harder. "Okay," David said, more to himself than to her. "Okay, we can do this. We have to do this," but he had no idea how. He had no idea what came next. He just sat there in that corner booth holding his daughter while she cried, wishing desperately that someone, anyone, could tell him what he was doing wrong. He didn't know that his wish was about to be answered. He didn't know that in just a few moments someone would approach his table who would change everything. Someone who would see past the expensive suit and the fancy stroller and understand exactly what he needed. But that hadn't happened yet. Right now, David was alone with his pain and his crying baby and the crushing weight of knowing he was failing the one person who needed him most. David was staring at the table, tears still wet on his cheeks, when he heard a voice. Soft. Gentle. The kind of voice that doesn't demand attention but somehow gets it anyway. "Excuse me, dear. May I sit down?" He looked up. An older woman stood beside his booth. She had to be in her 70s, maybe older. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple bun. She wore a faded blue cardigan over a plain dress. Nothing fancy. Nothing expensive. Her face was lined with wrinkles, but her eyes were warm. Really warm. Like she'd seen 1,000 hard days and came out the other side still believing in kindness. David wiped his face quickly. "I'm sorry, we're just leaving." "Are you?" The woman tilted her head slightly. "Because it looks to me like you're stuck. And that's okay. We all get stuck sometimes." Lily was still crying, though not as loudly now, more like she was exhausted from all that screaming. The woman glanced at the baby, then back at David. She didn't look annoyed or judgmental like everyone else had. She just looked like she understood something. "I don't mean to bother you," David said. His voice sounded rough. "She's been crying for hours. I don't know what's wrong." "I know you don't," the woman said simply. "Mind if I sit?" "I promise I'm not here to judge or give you a lecture. I just thought maybe you could use some company." David wanted to say no, wanted to grab his daughter and get out of there before he embarrassed himself any more than he already had. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the way this stranger looked at him without pity. Just understanding. Maybe he was just too tired to keep pretending he had everything under control. "Sure," he said quietly. "Okay." The woman slid into the booth across from him. She didn't reach for Lily, didn't try to take over or offer to hold her. She just sat there, folding her hands on the table. "My name's Helen," she said, "and before you worry, I'm not selling anything or trying to recruit you for anything. I was just having my tea over there when I noticed you." "David," he managed to say. He shifted Lily in his arms, trying another position. She kept crying. "I'm sorry she's so loud." "Babies cry," Helen said with a small shrug. "That's what they do. It's the only way they know how to talk." "She's trying to tell you something." "I know," David said, frustration creeping into his voice. "But I don't know what. I've tried everything. Fed her, changed her, checked if she's hurt. Nothing works. Nothing I do ever works." Helen was quiet for a moment. She just watched him. Not the baby, him. And David felt exposed in a way he hadn't felt in years. Like this stranger could see right through his expensive suit and his money and all the walls he'd built up. "When's the last time you took a deep breath?" Helen asked. David blinked. "What? A real breath?" "Deep down in your belly. When's the last time you did that?" I don't know. What does that have to do with anything?" Helen smiled. Not a big smile, just a gentle curve of her lips. "Humor me. Take a breath. A real one. In through your nose, out through your mouth." David almost said no, almost told her this was ridiculous. But Lily was crying in his arms and nothing else had worked, so what did he have to lose? He breathed in slowly through his nose, held it, let it out through his mouth. "Again," Helen said. Slower this time, he did it again. And again. And with each breath he felt his shoulders starting to drop, the tight knot in his chest loosening just a little. He hadn't even realized how tense he'd been, how he'd been holding his whole body like a clenched fist for months. "Now look at your baby," Helen said softly. "Really look at her." David looked down at Lily. Her cries had gotten quieter. Her little body wasn't as stiff anymore. She was still fussing, but something had changed. "You feel that?" Helen asked. "She's calming down. Not because you did some special trick or found the magic solution, because you calmed down." David stared at his daughter, then at Helen. "I don't understand." "Babies are like little mirrors," Helen said, leaning forward slightly. "They feel everything we feel. When you're tense and scared and wound up tight, they get tense and scared too. It's not your fault, you didn't know. But that's what's happening." David felt something crack open in his chest. "She can feel how scared I am?" "Every second of every day," Helen said gently. "And honey, I can see you're terrified. Anyone would be in your situation." "How did you—" David stopped. "Did someone tell you? Do you know me?" Helen shook her head. "I don't know you from Adam, but I know that look. I've seen it before. Actually, I've worn it before." She paused. "I lost my husband 42 years ago. My kids were 3 and 5 at the time. I was 30 years old and suddenly alone with 2 little ones who needed me. And I was just as lost as you are right now." David felt tears threatening again. "I don't know how to do this. My wife, she knew everything. She could calm Lily down in seconds. And I try to do what she did, but it doesn't work. It's like Lily knows I'm just pretending. Like she knows I have no idea what I'm doing." "Of course you don't know what you're doing," Helen said matter-of-factly. "You're new at this. Your wife probably didn't know what she was doing at first either, but she had time to learn. And more importantly, I'm guessing she wasn't carrying around the weight of grief while trying to figure it out." David swallowed hard. "I can't fall apart. I have to be strong for her." "Being strong doesn't mean not feeling things," Helen said. "It means feeling them and keeping going anyway. But honey, you can't pour from an empty cup. When's the last time you let yourself grieve?" "I don't have time to grieve," David said. The words came out sharper than he meant them to. "I have a daughter to take care of, a company to run, people depending on me. I can't just fall apart." "So you're falling apart in pieces instead," Helen observed. "A little bit every day. And that baby in your arms feels every single piece that breaks off." David looked down at Lily again. She was quieter now. Her eyes were starting to close. He hadn't done anything different, really. He was just breathing, sitting, talking to this stranger who somehow understood. "I miss her so much," David whispered. "Every day I wake up and for half a second I forget she's gone. And then I remember and it's like losing her all over again." Helen reached across the table. She didn't grab his hand or anything dramatic. She just rested her fingers lightly on the table near his, close enough to offer comfort but not so close it felt invasive. "Of course you miss her," Helen said. "You're supposed to miss her. She was your person, the mother of your child. That doesn't just go away because you have responsibilities. But Lily needs me to have it together. Lily needs you to be human," Helen corrected gently. "She needs you to be real. Not perfect. There's a big difference." They sat in silence for a moment. Lily had fallen asleep against David's chest. Actually asleep. Not just exhausted from crying, peaceful. Her little hand was curled against his shirt. Her breathing was soft and even. "How did you do that?" David asked, staring at his sleeping daughter in wonder. "I didn't do anything," Helen said with a knowing smile. "You did. You stopped trying so hard to fix everything and just let yourself be present. That's all she wanted. To feel you really there with her. Not just holding her while your mind ran in 1,000 directions." David felt something shift inside him. Not fixed. Not healed. but different. Like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't completely failing at this after all. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, looking up at Helen. "Don't thank me yet," she said, pulling a napkin toward her. She took a pen from her purse and wrote something down. "This is my phone number. I want you to call me. Not right now, you need to get this little one home for a proper nap. But when you're drowning again, and you will be because parenting is hard and grief is harder, I want you to call." "I couldn't," David started. "You could and you will," Helen said firmly, sliding the napkin across to him. "Because right now you're trying to do this alone, and nobody should have to do this alone. Not with a new baby and a broken heart. You call me. Morning, noon, or midnight. I mean it." David picked up the napkin. Helen's handwriting was shaky but clear. A phone number. That was it. No strings attached. No expectations. Just an offer of help from a stranger who saw him at his lowest and didn't turn away. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you do this for someone you don't even know?" Helen stood up slowly, gathering her purse. She smiled at him, really smiled this time. "Because 42 years ago someone did it for me, and I promised myself that if I ever saw someone else drowning the way I was drowning, I'd throw them a rope. Consider this your rope, David." She walked away before he could say anything else. David watched her go, this ordinary-looking old woman in a faded cardigan. She picked up her tea from a table by the window, left some money on the counter, and walked out into the afternoon sunshine. David looked down at the napkin in his hand. Then at Lily, still sleeping peacefully against his chest. For the first time in 3 months, he didn't feel completely alone. He didn't know it yet, but that napkin would change his life. That one conversation with a stranger in a coffee shop would set him on a path he never could have imagined. But right now, in this moment, all he knew was that someone had seen him, really seen him, and hadn't looked away. That was enough. David didn't call Helen that night, or the next night, or the night after that. The napkin with her number sat on his kitchen counter, getting moved around every day but never thrown away. He'd pick it up sometimes, pull out his phone, and then put it back down. What would he even say? "Thanks for the advice? Sorry I'm still a mess." But 3 weeks later, at 2 a.m, he found himself dialing the number. Lily was crying again. Not the desperate screaming from the coffee shop, but that tired, frustrated cry that meant she didn't want to sleep but was too exhausted to stay awake. David had been walking circles around his living room for an hour, bouncing her gently, trying everything he knew. Nothing was working. The phone rang twice before Helen's voice came through, clear and awake, like she'd been expecting his call. "David? How did you know it was me?" he asked, surprised. "Because it's 2 a.m. and you sound exhausted," Helen said simply. "What's going on?" "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have called so late. I didn't know who else." "Stop apologizing and talk to me. What's happening right now?" David looked down at Lily. "She won't sleep. She's tired, but she fights it every single night. And I'm doing the breathing thing you taught me. I'm staying calm. But it's still not enough." "Are you really calm?" Helen asked. "Or are you just pretending to be calm while your mind races with everything you think you're doing wrong?" David stopped pacing. Helen had done it again, seen right through him without even being in the room. "Both," he admitted quietly. "Then she knows. Babies always know. Here's what I want you to do. Put me on speaker and set the phone down somewhere safe. Then sit down with her. Not in a rocking chair, not standing up. Just sit down on the floor or the couch. Okay." David put the phone on the coffee table and sat down on the couch, adjusting Lily in his arms. "Now tell me about Rachel," Helen said through the speaker. David's breath caught. "What? Tell me about your wife." "What was she like?" "I don't see how that helps. Trust me." "What was she like?" David swallowed hard. Nobody had asked him that. Not since the funeral. People asked how he was doing, how the baby was, if he needed anything. But nobody asked about Rachel. "She was funny," he said slowly. "Like really funny. She could make me laugh when I was stressed about work. She'd do these impressions of my business partners that were so accurate it was scary." He felt himself smiling despite everything. And she sang to Lily. Couldn't carry a tune to save her life, but she'd make up these ridiculous songs about diaper changes and bath time. "Keep going," Helen said softly. "She was a terrible cook, burned everything. We joked that the smoke detector was her kitchen timer." David felt tears on his face but kept talking. But she tried. Every week she'd attempt some new recipe, and it would be a disaster, and we'd end up ordering pizza. And she loved planning things, had these elaborate plans for Lily's future. First day of school, first birthday party, everything. Lily had stopped crying. David looked down and realized she was staring up at him with her big blue eyes. Just listening to his voice. She would have been such a good mom, David whispered. She had all these ideas. She read every book, made lists, and then she didn't get to do any of it. But you're doing it, Helen said. And David, she's still here, in Lily's eyes. In the way you love this baby. In every story you tell. Rachel didn't get to be here physically, but her love is still in that house. David wiped his eyes. Lily's eyes were starting to close. Her little body was relaxing against him. How do you do that? He asked. How do you always know exactly what to say? Helen laughed softly through the speaker. I don't. I just know that sometimes we need permission to feel what we're feeling. You've been so busy trying to be strong that you forgot it's okay to be sad. If I let myself be sad, I'm afraid I won't stop, David admitted. Then don't stop. Be sad. Cry. Miss her. And then, when you're ready, you'll keep going. Not because you have to, because you want to. For Lily, for yourself, for Rachel's memory. They talked for another hour. Helen told him about her own grief journey, how she'd messed up constantly with her kids, fed them cereal for dinner more times than she could count, let them watch too much TV when she needed 5 minutes to herself, made 1,000 mistakes and somehow her kids turned out fine anyway. The secret nobody tells you, Helen said, is that there's no such thing as a perfect parent. There are just people doing their best on their worst days, and somehow that turns out to be enough. By the time they hung up, Lily was sound asleep. David carried her to her crib and laid her down gently. She didn't even stir. He stood there for a long moment, watching her breathe, this tiny person who depended on him for everything. The next morning, David called Helen again, this time at a reasonable hour. Can I buy you coffee? He asked. To say thank you properly. You can buy me tea, Helen corrected. Same coffee shop as before. 2 o'clock. When David arrived with Lily, Helen was already there at a corner table. She had a pot of tea in front of her and smiled when she saw them. She looks well rested, Helen observed as David sat down. 5 whole hours, David said, still amazed. I didn't know babies could do that. They can when their parents finally relax. Helen poured herself some tea. So what brings you here besides gratitude? David had been thinking about this all morning. I want to learn everything you know, about babies, about grief, about how to do this without falling apart every day. Will you teach me? Helen studied him for a moment. I'm not a professional, David. I'm just an old woman who's been through some things. That's exactly what I need, David said. Not another book or another expert. Just someone who understands, someone who's been where I am. And what do I get out of this arrangement? Helen asked with a slight smile. Whatever you want. I can pay you or... Helen held up her hand. I don't want your money, honey. But I'll tell you what I do want. I want you to promise me that when you figure this out, and you will, you'll help someone else who's drowning. Deal? David didn't hesitate. Deal. That was how it started. Helen began coming to David's house twice a week. She showed him how to give Lily a bath without being terrified he'd drop her, taught him which cries meant hunger versus tiredness versus just needing comfort, demonstrated how to burp a baby properly, all the little things that seemed obvious to everyone else, but nobody had bothered to teach him. But more than that, she taught him how to grieve and parent at the same time, how to let himself cry when he needed to and then get up and change a diaper, how to talk to Lily about Rachel, keeping her mother's memory alive even though the baby was too young to understand. One day she'll ask about her mom, Helen said during one visit, and you'll have all these stories ready for her. That's a gift, David. A real gift. One afternoon, about 2 months after their first meeting, David was watching Helen fold tiny baby clothes with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000,000 times. Can I ask you something personal? He said. You can ask. I might not answer. Helen smiled. Why do you do this? Help people, I mean. You volunteer at that community center. You helped me. You don't seem to have much yourself, but you give so much to others. Helen was quiet for a moment, folding a small pink outfit. After my husband died, I was lost. Angry at the world. Angry at God. Angry at everyone who still had their person. And then one day, another widow showed up at my door. She'd heard about me somehow, brought me a casserole and just sat with me while I cried. She looked up at David. That woman taught me that we survive grief by sharing it, by not letting each other drown alone. She helped me through that first terrible year. And when I came out the other side, I knew what I had to do with the rest of my life. Help other people through it, David said. Exactly. I volunteer at the community center 3 days a week. It's in a rougher part of town. Lots of single parents struggling to make ends meet. Young moms, dads who don't know what they're doing. People who can't afford nannies or fancy baby classes. I teach parenting workshops, run a grief support group, whatever needs doing. David set down the baby bottle he'd been cleaning. Something was forming in his mind. An idea. A purpose. Will you take me there? He asked. To the community center? Helen raised an eyebrow. Why? Because I want to see what you do. I want to understand how you help people. And maybe, he paused, trying to form the words right. Maybe I want to help too. Helen studied him carefully. David, these aren't people in expensive suits having problems they can solve with money. These are real struggles, poverty, addiction, abuse. It's hard to witness. I know I've been privileged, David said. I know my money has protected me from a lot. But grief doesn't care about your bank account. And if I can use what I have to help people who are hurting, then maybe Rachel's death can mean something, Helen finished quietly. Maybe it can create something good in this world. Yes, David said. Exactly that. Helen smiled, really smiled with her whole face. Okay then, this Saturday, 9 in the morning. Wear something you don't mind getting messy. And David, leave your wallet at home. What these folks need can't be bought, as David E. drove home that evening with Lily sleeping in her car seat. He felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not the fake kind he'd been forcing himself to feel. Real hope. The kind that makes you think maybe, just maybe, you can survive this. Maybe you can even do something meaningful with the pain. He didn't know it yet, but that visit to the community center would change everything, would give him a purpose beyond just surviving each day, would show him that his wealth meant nothing compared to the human connection Helen had taught him to value. But that was Saturday. Right now he had a sleeping baby, a full heart, and for the first time since Rachel died, a reason to believe tomorrow might be better than today. That was more than enough. Saturday morning came faster than David expected. He stood in front of his closet at 8 in the morning, staring at rows of expensive suits and designer clothes. Helen had said to wear something he didn't mind getting messy. The problem was everything he owned was either expensive or dry clean only. Finally, he found an old college sweatshirt buried in the back and a pair of jeans he'd forgotten he had. When he looked in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. He looked normal, regular, just a guy with a baby, not a millionaire tech entrepreneur. The community center was on the other side of town in a neighborhood David had probably driven through but never really seen. The buildings were older here, paint peeling in places, small shops with hand-painted signs, people sitting on stoops watching the morning come to life. It was a different world from his gated community and luxury high-rise office. The center itself was a converted church building. The cross was still on top, but the sign out front read Riverside Community Center. David parked his BMW and immediately felt self-conscious. His car probably cost more than most people here made in a year. Helen was waiting by the door. She looked different here too. More at home. Like this was where she really belonged. You came, she said, smiling. I said I would. David got Lily out of her car seat. What now? Now you meet people and keep your mouth shut about who you are, Helen said bluntly. These folks don't need to know you're rich. They just need to know you're a dad who's figuring things out like everyone else. Can you do that? David nodded. I can do that. Inside, the center was bustling with activity. Kids ran around playing tag. A group of women sat in a circle in one corner, talking and laughing. In another room, David could hear someone teaching what sounded like a cooking class. The whole place smelled like coffee and something baking. Saturday mornings are our busiest time, Helen explained as they walked through. We do parenting, workshops, kids' activities, job training, community meals, whatever people need. A young woman approached them, maybe 25, with a toddler on her hip and another kid holding her hand. She looked exhausted in a way David recognized now, the kind of tired that comes from doing everything alone. Helen, thank God you're here, the woman said. Can you watch Tommy for like 10 minutes? I need to fill out these job applications, but he won't sit still and I can't focus. Of course, sweetheart. Tommy, you want to help Miss Helen set up the snack table? Helen held out her hand and the little boy took it eagerly. The woman's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. It's been a week. I know, baby. Go do your applications. Take your time. Helen squeezed her shoulder and then led Tommy away. David stood there, not sure what to do. The woman noticed him and wiped her eyes quickly. Sorry, you must think I'm a mess. Not at all, David said. I get it. I really do, she looked at Lily. First kid? Yeah, 6 months old. It's hard, right? Especially alone. I've got 3 and no help. Their dad took off when I got pregnant with the youngest. She gestured to the baby on her hip. Never even met this one. David felt something twist in his chest. Here he was with all his money and resources, thinking he had it hard. This woman was doing it with 3 kids and no support and still managing to fill out job applications. You're doing amazing, he said quietly. I mean that, she laughed, but it was a tired laugh. I'm surviving. That's about all I can claim. But hey, that's something, right? She shifted the baby to her other hip. I better go before I lose my nerve on these applications. Nice meeting you. David watched her walk to a table in the corner and pull out a stack of papers. She was doing it all right there, baby on her lap, filling out forms while trying to keep her toddler from running off. No quiet office, no nanny. No breaks. Helen came back a few minutes later with Tommy happily munching on crackers. Come on, she said to David. There's someone I want you to meet. She led him to the back room where about a dozen people sat in folding chairs arranged in a circle, adults of all ages. Some held babies. Some looked like they'd been crying. This is our grief group, Helen said softly. It meets every Saturday. People who've lost someone and are trying to figure out how to keep living. A man about David's age sat in the circle, holding a newborn. His eyes were red and his clothes looked like he'd been wearing them for days. That's Kevin, Helen whispered. Lost his wife in childbirth 3 weeks ago. He won't leave the house except to come here. David's throat tightened. That could have been him. That almost was him. Can I sit in? He asked Helen. She looked surprised. You sure? Yeah, I think I need to. Helen led him into the room. The group looked up as they entered. Everyone, this is David, Helen said. He lost his wife a few months ago. New dad, sound familiar? A few people nodded knowingly. Kevin looked up and locked eyes with David. There was recognition there. The kind that only comes from shared pain. Have a seat, an older man said. We were just sharing our worst moments this week. Keeps it real, you know? David sat down, Lily in his arms. For the next hour, he listened to stories that broke his heart. Kevin talked about how he couldn't look at his daughter without seeing his wife. A woman named Patricia described forgetting her husband was gone and setting a place for him at dinner. A teenage boy shared how kids at school didn't understand why he wasn't over his mom's death yet. When it was David's turn, he didn't know what to say at first. Then words just started coming. I hired 3 nannies because I thought money could fix this, he said. Thought if I just found the right help, I wouldn't have to face the fact that I have no idea how to be a dad without my wife. And a few weeks ago, I had a breakdown in a coffee shop. Complete meltdown. And Helen, he gestured to her, she saved me. Not with some magic solution, just by seeing me and not looking away. Kevin spoke up, his voice rough. Does it get easier? David looked at Helen, then back at Kevin. I don't know. I hope so, but I know it gets different. Less like drowning and more like swimming. Still hard, but at least you're moving. After the group, Kevin came up to David. Can I ask you something? Sure. How do you do it? Look at your daughter without falling apart? David thought about that. Honestly, some days I can't. Some days I look at her and all I see is what Rachel's missing. But other days I look at her and see Rachel. Her smile, her eyes. It's like Rachel's still here in little pieces, and that helps. Kevin's eyes filled with tears. Nobody said anything like that to me before. Everyone just says time heals or she's in a better place. But that doesn't help when I'm up at 3 in the morning with a screaming baby and no idea what I'm doing. Call me, David said impulsively. He pulled out his phone. Give me your number. When you're drowning at 3 in the morning, call me. Because I'll probably be up anyway and we can drown together. Kevin actually smiled. Just a small one, but it was there. They exchanged numbers. Over the next few hours, David saw more of what the center did. He helped serve lunch in the community kitchen, sitting with families who were struggling to make rent but still laughing together over simple meals. He watched Helen teach a parenting class where moms and dads asked questions David had been too proud to ask. He met volunteers who gave their time not because they had to, but because they'd been helped once and wanted to pay it forward. By the time they left that afternoon, David's mind was racing. Helen, this place is incredible, he said as they walked to their cars, but it's falling apart. The roof leaks. The heating barely works. You need so much. We make do with what we have, Helen said simply. But what if you didn't have to just make do? David couldn't stop the words from coming. What if you could actually help more people? Better facilities. More programs. David. Helen stopped walking and looked at him seriously. If you're about to offer money, I need you to think very carefully. This isn't your guilt or grief talking. This has to be real. It is real, David said. Helen, you gave me something nobody else could. You gave me hope. You gave me a reason to believe I could survive this. And today I met people who need that same thing. People who are doing this with nothing while I'm over here with everything and still couldn't figure it out. Having nothing doesn't make them better at it, Helen said. It just makes it harder. Exactly. So why not make it easier? Why not create a place where people like Kevin and that young mom and everyone else can get real help? Not just a rundown building where volunteers do their best, but something real, something that actually works. Helen was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, This isn't about you feeling better about yourself, is it? No, David said honestly. It's about making Rachel's death mean something. She wanted to help people. Had all these plans for charity work once Lily was older. She never got to do any of it. But maybe I can. Maybe I can build something she would have been proud of. Helen's eyes got misty. She'd be proud of you right now. The man you're becoming. I'm not there yet, David said, but I want to be. And I think this is how. Will you help me? Will you help me build something real? Helen smiled. On one condition. I'm in charge of the programs. You can fund it, but I run it, deal? Deal. David held out his hand and Helen shook it. As David drove home that evening with Lily sleeping peacefully in the back, he felt something he hadn't felt since before Rachel died. Purpose. Real purpose. Not just surviving each day or running his company. Something bigger. Something that mattered. He didn't know that in 1 year what started as a simple handshake would become something that changed hundreds of lives. He didn't know that Kevin would become one of his closest friends. He didn't know that the young mom from today would end up running one of the center's most successful programs. All he knew was that for the first time in months, he was excited about tomorrow. Not scared of it. Not dreading it. Actually looking forward to what came next. And that, he realized as he looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror, was everything. 1 year later, David stood in front of a building he barely recognized. Where the old rundown community center used to be, there was now a beautiful modern facility with large windows and fresh paint. The sign above the entrance read, The Rachel Chen Memorial Family Resource Center. It was opening day. News cameras were setting up outside. Local politicians had shown up for photo opportunities. David's business partners stood around looking impressed with themselves for supporting the project. But David wasn't paying attention to any of that. He was looking for Helen. He found her inside, directing volunteers and making sure everything was ready. She wore a nice dress for the occasion, but she still had that same warm, no-nonsense energy she'd had the day they met in the coffee shop. Big day, David said, walking up to her with Lily toddling beside him. Holding his hand, Helen looked down at Lily and smiled. Look at you, little miss. walking around like you own the place. Lily giggled and reached for Helen, who scooped her up easily. Over the past year, Helen had become like a grandmother to Lily. More than that, she'd become family. You nervous? Helen asked David. Terrified, he admitted. What if we mess this up? What if it doesn't help anyone? Then we'll fix it and try again, Helen said simply. That's what we do. We keep trying. The past year had been the hardest and best year of David's life. He'd poured millions into building this center. But more than that, he'd poured himself into it. He'd spent countless hours here, not just writing checks, but actually being present, learning, listening, understanding what people really needed. The center now had everything the old building lacked: a commercial kitchen for cooking classes and community meals, a computer lab for job training, private rooms for counseling and support groups, a childcare area so parents could attend programs without worrying about their kids, medical services twice a week, legal aid, housing assistance, everything in one place. But the real heart of it was the people. Helen had built a team of volunteers and staff who actually cared. People who'd been through their own struggles and wanted to help others through theirs. Kevin was here, working as a peer counselor for grieving parents. The young mom David had met that first day, her name was Christina, now ran the job training program after she'd gotten back on her feet. People helping people. That's what Helen always said. 5 minutes to the ribbon cutting, someone called out. David's stomach twisted.
He had to give a speech.
He'd spoken at countless business conferences and investor meetings, but this felt different. More important. More real. Helen handed Lily back to him. You're going to do fine. Just speak from the heart. That's all these folks want to hear. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Families from the neighborhood. Former clients from the old center. Local business owners. Media with their cameras. David's parents had flown in from across the country, though they still didn't really understand why their son was spending his time and money on something that wouldn't make him richer. David stood at the podium with Lily in his arms. He'd written a speech, had it in his pocket, but looking out at all these faces, he realized he didn't need it. A year and a half ago, he began, his voice shaking slightly. I was sitting in a coffee shop having the worst day of my life. My wife had died. My baby wouldn't stop crying. I had all the money in the world, but I couldn't figure out how to be a dad. I was drowning and I didn't know how to ask for help. He paused, looking down at Lily. She was playing with his tie, completely oblivious to the cameras and the crowd. And then a stranger approached my table, an elderly woman I'd never met before. She didn't offer me solutions or expert advice. She just saw me, really saw me, and she didn't look away. That woman is Helen Wilson, and she saved my life that day. David looked over at Helen, who stood off to the side with tears in her eyes. Helen taught me something I never learned in business school or from any success manual. She taught me that we're not meant to do life alone, that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom, that the most valuable thing we can give each other isn't money or advice. It's presence. It's showing up. It's saying, I see you and I'm not going anywhere. The crowd was silent now, really listening. This center isn't named after my wife because I wanted a monument. It's named after her because she believed in helping people. She wanted to make a difference in this world. And even though she's not here to do it herself, I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing it for her, for Lily, and for every person who's ever sat in a coffee shop feeling like they're drowning with nobody to throw them a rope. David's voice cracked, but he kept going. This building isn't just about services or programs. It's about community. It's about making sure nobody has to face their hardest days alone. Whether you're grieving or struggling to pay rent or just trying to figure out how to be a parent, there's a place for you here. No judgment, no barriers, just people who care. He looked directly at the families in the crowd. I learned this year that having money doesn't protect you from pain. But community does. Connection does. People who show up and say, I've been there and you're going to make it through. That's what saves us. That's what this center is about. When he finished, there wasn't applause right away, just a moment of heavy silence. Then Kevin started clapping and others joined in. But it wasn't the polite applause David was used to at business events. It was real, from people who understood what he was trying to say. After the ribbon cutting, people flooded into the building to tour the facilities. David found himself pulled into conversation after conversation. A single father thanked him for the child care program. A grandmother hugged him and said she'd been waiting years for something like this in the neighborhood. A teenager told him the computer lab would help him apply for colleges. But the moment that hit David hardest was when Christina came up to him, her 3 kids in tow. "You remember me?" she asked. "Of course. You were filling out job applications that first day I came to the old center." She smiled. "I got one of those jobs. Been working there 8 months now. Saved enough to move to a better apartment, and now I'm helping other people do the same thing through the program here." Her voice got thick with emotion. "You gave me hope when I didn't have any, and now I get to give that to someone else." David felt tears in his eyes. "You did the work. You changed your life. But I couldn't have done it alone," Christina said. "That's what Helen taught me. What you helped me see. We need each other. That's not weakness. That's just being human." As the day wound down and the crowds thinned out, David found Helen sitting in one of the counseling rooms. Looking out the window, "You did it," he said, sitting down beside her. "We did it," Helen corrected. "This was always bigger than one person." "I still can't believe it sometimes," David said. "A year ago I was a mess. And now you're still a mess," Helen interrupted with a smile. "Just a mess with purpose. There's a difference," David laughed. "Fair enough." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Helen said, "You know what I'm most proud of? It's not the building or the programs. It's you, the man you've become. Rachel would be so proud." "You think so?" "I know so. You took your pain and turned it into something beautiful. You didn't let grief destroy you. You let it reshape you into someone who helps others through their grief. That's the greatest tribute you could give her memory." David looked down at Lily, who had fallen asleep against his chest, 1 year old now, walking and babbling and full of personality, growing up without her mother but surrounded by love anyway. "I still miss her every day," David said quietly. "You're supposed to," Helen replied. "Love doesn't end just because life does. But love also grows. It expands to include new people, new purposes, new ways of being in the world." Over the next few months, the center became exactly what David and Helen had hoped. Hundreds of families came through the doors. Some needed help with basics like food and housing. Others needed support through grief or trauma. Everyone found something here, whether it was practical assistance or just a place where they belonged. Kevin started leading a support group for single fathers. It met twice a week and was always full. David attended every session, sharing his own struggles and learning from others. The wealth gap that had once separated him from everyone else seemed to disappear in those circles. Pain was the great equalizer. Everyone's tears looked the same. David's business partners thought he'd lost his mind, spending so much time at the center instead of at the office. But David had realized something important. He'd built a successful company, yes, but success without meaning was just noise. This center, these people, this was what actually mattered. One evening, about 6 months after opening, David was cleaning up after a parenting workshop when his phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Is this David? The guy from the grief group?" "Yes, who's this?" "You don't know me, but Kevin gave me your number. My wife just died 2 days ago. I have a newborn and I don't know what to do. I'm sitting in my car outside a grocery store and I can't stop crying and—" "Where are you?" David asked immediately. "I'm coming to you." He got the address and drove there with Lily strapped in her car seat. When he arrived, he found a man about his age sitting in a beat-up sedan, head in his hands, baby crying in the back. David knocked on the window. The man looked up, confused and terrified. "I'm David, you called me. Can I sit with you?" The man nodded. David got in the passenger seat. For the next 2 hours, David did for this stranger exactly what Helen had done for him. He listened. He shared his own story. He let the man cry without trying to fix it. He held the baby when the man's hands were shaking too hard. He breathed with him until the panic subsided. "It gets different," David told him, the same words he'd said to Kevin a year ago. "Not easier. Just different. Like swimming instead of drowning." "Will you help me?" the man asked. "I can't do this alone." "You don't have to," David said. "None of us do. That's the whole point." As David drove home that night, Lily sleeping peacefully in the back, he thought about that day in the coffee shop 18 months ago. The worst day of his life had led to this. To helping a stranger in a parking lot, to building a center that changed lives, to becoming the kind of person who showed up for people in their darkest moments. Helen was right. He was still a mess. Still grieving, still figuring things out day by day. But now he was a mess with purpose. A mess who helped other messes. And somehow that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.